Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh, here in year 17 of the Data Management Radio Show. We've been rocking and rolling for quite some time now, and some things change a lot, some things never change. And one thing that will never, ever change is the need for data. That's what the show is about. It's all about data management, data persistence. Obviously, a lot of attention is on AI these days. You know what AI needs to do its job? Data. Lots and lots and lots of data. And today we're talking about one of my favorite topics, which is really real time data. And that actually is a bit of a play off on one of my favorite movies, Repo Man. The music for our show is from the movie Repo Man from way back in 1983, I think, with Emilio Estevez and a couple other characters. And this one scene where he says he had this dream and it was really real, it's realistic. So, in fact, the first article I ever wrote in this industry was way back in 2002, I want to say, and it's all about real time data. So, 22 years ago, we were talking about real time data, and like things have changed since then. There's a lot going on. There are a lot of different engines out there to do it. It's a lot less expensive to do it. The compute is much more powerful these days. We have distributed architectures. There are lots of different ways you can fry the fish these days, if you will. And we're going to find out about those from our guests today. So we've got John Kreisa from Couchbase and also Frank Levenor from Data Sleek, both experts in the data field. And I'll just say that, when push comes to shove, like I said, there are lots of different ways you can do this. So buying enterprise software is a very serious matter. You want to make sure you buy the right technologies. You want a vendor who's going to work with you and be there for you and change and adapt over time. And of course, Couchbase is one such company. They're one of the many companies that spun out to compete against the former Goliath of Oracle, for example, and IBM and DB2. And I remember watching this database explosion a number of years ago, and it's really quite impressive. You got a whole bunch of different databases: MongoDB, Redis, Couchbase. There's like a dozen or more of these open source databases, and they're all fit for purpose, and they're all doing interesting things. MariaDB, of course, MySQL. It's just the list goes on and on these days. I think there's like 147 established database vendors. So what does that mean? It means you got a lot of choice, but you got to figure out where does one database engine excel versus another, and that's what we're going to find out today. So with that, John Kresa, bring you in from, of course, Couchbase. Tell us, in the real-time world, you guys have done some interesting stuff lately. What's the latest with Couchbase?
Thanks. Good to be with you again, Eric, and good to be with your audience. So I'm John Kreis. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Couchbase, and we offer Couchbase Capella, which is a cloud database platform for modern applications, and modern applications that include operational data, but we've also added a columnar data store for that real-time processing and analytics of data, and it eliminates some important latencies and serves some real important needs in terms of giving enterprises the ability to deploy applications, adaptive applications, as we would call them,
Hmm.
to their customers, which can react to real-time data, to real-time inputs, make them much more situationally aware, hyper personalized, right? So that you can get that experience and take a wide variety of data into the database and give those experiences.
Yeah, and it's interesting, you were mentioning before the show with this new columnar store that you've added to do what amounts to in database analytics is the term we used to use. And you think about how we got here, and obviously there are some big Goliaths that are still around, Teradata, for example, IBM,
Mhm.
of course, Oracle, they're all
Yeah,
still selling software, selling database
sure,
software.
sure.
But, when you can bolt on a functionality like that, you are really serving all sorts of different purposes because to your point, historically, you would have had to have some other tool and you pull the data out into that tool and that's where you
Mhm.
do. And it's like that increases not only latency, but it creates another choke point. It creates another bottleneck. It creates
Yep,
another place that things can break. So
yep.
when you can do that inside, I mean, and the real question is, how do you set that up and how do you get it all running? But I think it makes complete sense to have the one system that you're using as your foundation, your data foundation, serve both of these purposes. We can do that today efficiently, right?
Yeah, that's right. And it by having them side by side in the same architecture, it reduces, as you said, that latency. There's no ETL process
Hmm.
to move data to another system where it gets processed. In addition, there's a impedance mismatch which is overcome. We are a document-based database based on JSON. And so the columnar store also operates in JSON. So the data can transfer seamlessly between the two. And that just gives a much faster, better experience for providing those analytics back into, back into the applications, back into the operational store, which is the core foundation of Couchbase, as you said, in-memory architecture distributed for really, really interactive applications. Our customers run their most mission critical and business critical applications on Couchbase. So bringing that analytic capability close in there, the feedback we've had from customers has been super positive.
Yeah, and I heard a quote. This is a number of years ago. It's probably almost 10 years ago now, but I'll never forget this. The guy said that JSON is the JPEG of data, right? And I was like, hmm,
I haven't
that's
heard
it.
that one, but I like it.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah,
And of course, JSON is this architecture, right? It's like it's a hierarchy, basically. What was it? There used to be there's HTML, and wasn't it XTML or something like that? Or what was
XML certainly was
XML?
a
I mean,
description language. Yeah,
it's still there. I mean, people
yeah,
still use XML, but JSON just won the battle, right? I mean,
yeah,
JSON is everywhere. And maybe just explain to the audience, the business world out there, why a JSON architecture matters for being able to capture all sorts of different architectures of data, right? I
yeah.
think that's the key, is that it's not just, columns and rows. You're talking about a whole hierarchy with nested data and all kind of different things. And because you're a JSON database by architecture, that means you can absorb all kinds of different traditionally unwieldy data types. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, that the document using the document based on JSON as the fundamental storage structure and representation of the data gives you a lot of flexibility because it's self-describing, right? You know what kind of structure and data is coming because it's within that, but it's not limited to rows and columns. It can actually be widely variable in terms of how you set it up so that a document database can handle time series data, it can handle graph-like data, it can handle medical data, medical records, it can handle transactional data. I mean, there's no doubt that Couchbase is being used for transactional applications, which are serving financially related applications. So we've got all that flexibility that comes by making the choice to use documents in a JSON based document as the core infrastructure. So lots of flexibility there.
I've got another client that was doing some really interesting stuff with JSON, and they view JSON as a de facto reference architecture, which I thought was very interesting. And you can
Mhm.
use that as a personalization window into different entities or people. So in that JSON structure, you can bring in characteristics of the entity or the person or the
Yes.
group or whatever. And then that becomes key to your personalization efforts, right?
Yep. Yep, that's right. It's a metadata, if you will, is stored in amongst the very data itself, which gives you, again, more flexibility on how you create an application, which is, you know, reacting to how, which user you're and what the situation that user's in and how you're serving up that data, the experience you give them, a really hyper personalized experience. And that's key to it.
Well, and so I'll throw one last question over at you, and then we'll bring Frank into the conversation here. Personalization is going to be the key to success, it
Yep.
seems to me. And it's like anything else in this industry. We've talked about it for decades. It's not
Yep.
new. We've talked
Yep.
about it for a long, long time. Lots of people have been kind of jaded on the concept because it
Mhm.
never quite got there. And I think
Yeah.
it didn't get there because of the architectures, because of the compute power, because of lots of different factors. But now it's like, no, really, guys, we really, really can do this now, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is a combination of network speeds and processing power, flexibility that's in the application, and then a lot of times the analytics really did have to go to a separate system to get the insight you needed to do that personalization. Now, there's a lot of things out there, and we were talking before about AI and what that'll do. There's certainly fraud detection that use machine learning type AI applications, which are operating in real time. But those are very complex architectures. But now it's something where more applications can have that architecture and deliver that personalized experience.
That's good stuff. Let's bring in Frank Leveneur. Frank, You're in the space. You consult with your clients all the time. Real-time data, we were joking, it's not new. I wrote about it 22 years ago, and it was new then. It's not new now. It's been around a long time, but it really is real time now. What are your thoughts on the evolution of this industry and how close we are to delivering on long offered promises? What do you think?
Thank you. Well, first of all, just want to introduce myself a little bit. I have about 25 years of experience in databases. I started with Microsoft SQL back in the days, and then moved into MySQL. And I worked also on AWS, optimizing MySQL, ODS, and Aurora. And I saw, the evolution, how you used to manage a database on the server, and then after, AWS came in and the database was being managed, right, by AWS, and DBAs were afraid that we were going to be out of jobs, right? But I think what's important is to embrace the technology, right, to learn about it, and there's always going to be some work needed. Real-time analytics, real-time data, yeah, it's definitely something that has evolved enormously, especially with mobile devices, IoT devices, 5Gs. I think all those are going to accelerate the data feeds, AI, of course, right? Being able to use cameras and detect whatever it is. I was watching some video on YouTube yesterday where some cameras can detect the behavior of people on the street, right? Whether they are dancing or whether they are wearing a weapon, right, etc. So all this data it's going to be fed somewhere. Some analytics is going to be done in the background, but there's always going to be something happening. The challenge is going to be, to choose the storage, to choose the technology behind in order to process this very quickly, and whatever needs to be done also on that data, right? The challenge also about real-time data is the different data structure, right? There's structured data, unstructured data. So now we have sound, we have video, we have documents, we have text, we have just JSON, right, that gets fed with APIs. So it's really, I would say it's an interesting, because it brings a lot of challenges and makes you think, architect, find the right solution, find the right database engine, right, to do the job. Sometimes you choose the wrong, and then you have to migrate, right, which can be costly. So I've seen that a couple of times, especially for startups where they'll pick a database, they'll grow very quickly because they have a lot of data and they have success, right? And then they have to migrate because they're using the database. They are abusing, right, the database. They're running crazy queries on it, and some people are very creative. They come up with some multi-line and hundreds of lines of SQL query, and then they're surprised that their application is not working properly. A lot of people don't know that transaction is transaction and analytics is analytics. Two different world, two different behavior of the data, right? One is constantly evolving, it's alive. The other one is at rest, and you're just querying, right, the history. So it's a totally different behavior.
Yeah, and there's this thing that's not terribly new either. I think it was probably 9 years ago or so that I was looking into it. HTAP, as they call it, HTAP, Hybrid Transactional Analytical Processing. Montes Weben is a guy who was working on some of that stuff, as I recall. And
Yes.
what they would do is they had sort of a sniffer, meaning when the query comes through, the sniffer will look at this and say, is this a transactional workload or an analytical workload? And it'll route accordingly. Now, that stuff, have you seen that in practice, and how well does that work from your perspective, Frank?
Well, it's actually a very good question because we've been seeing these issues, right? Where, like you said, they want to use a database for both, right? The analytical and the transaction. Back in 2016, 14, I discovered a database engine at the time it was called MemSQL. Now it's called Single Store.
Right, sure.
Yep. And that's what they do, right? It's HTAP. They're able to do transaction, but they're able also to do analytics. And now they're also moving into the vector engine, right? So it's a pretty scalable solution And that's the thing what also kind of Snowflake pioneered, is to separate the compute, right, from the storage. I think it's also critical right now today to be able to not worry about your storage, right? Because that used to be a problem where your data goes too quickly, you run out of space and then your application goes down. So that now I think is a thing of the past, and SQL Store has transitioned to that. They use actually S3 as a storage layer, and then some caching mechanism, and then you can scale the compute as much as you need. They shard the data for you, so it's an efficient platform even for data ingestion. Being able to plug into Kafka and S3 and ingest data, it's very useful.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up vector databases. We should probably talk about that a little bit at least, because of course these are the tool of choice to go alongside a large language model to host your embeddings basically. And what these engines do is they just convert text and imagery to numeric values, and then they convert back to text or imagery on the other side. So you're always going to have a little bit of lossy nature to it because you are doing this conversion. But nonetheless, the vector databases are very, very good at comparison and contrasting, and they're really what did someone say? They're really consensus engines. And so what they're doing is they're taking so much of this data, and you have like a dog starts here and goes like this, and all dogs go like this, or they're in this general area. Cats are maybe over here, highways are over here, and somewhere in that expanse you can mix and match different things, but they're really consensus engines. So they're not, you know, they're doing different things than you would do for real-time data, for example, but nonetheless, they're a huge force out there. Everybody's working on their vector databases. And I look at this whole, and our first break is coming up here, but this whole new Gen AI spin has clearly captured the imagination of companies everywhere. It is not fit for every purpose in the data world. It is not fit for deterministic use cases. It is very fit for stochastic use cases, for discovery, for playing around with ideas and learning things. But I'm here to say that as a front end, these large language models are going to fundamentally change how we interact with information, how executives interact, how working people interact. So it's a big deal, and that vector database is a big part of that equation. But don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be right back in 1 minute. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking to a couple of data experts. We've got John Kreisa, CMO of Couchbase, and Frank Leveneur, the principal over at Data Sleek. And we're talking all about real-time data and data workflows and how data fuels all these different systems. And in the break, John, you mentioned a very interesting point, and it reminds me of one of my thought processes around all this, that these large language models are going to increasingly be part of a workflow. So not just the sort of be all end all solution unto themselves, because we all know that's not what you want to be doing with these things, but they're going to become part of systems. And you have this whole concept of RAG, this retrieval augmented generation, where everyone is jumping on RAG now. It came out of Meta, from what I understand, and they realize that, because these LLMs are distilled down to probabilistic math, you're never going to get 100% perfect score on certain things. You're always going to get hallucinations, as they call them, errors, as another one of my friends in the business calls, not hallucinating. It's just an error. It made something up, right? And where it makes things up is typically on the fringe. So remember, they're consensus engines. So anything, any topic that has been widely published or written about on the interwebs on which the models were trained, it's going to do a good job of breaking that stuff down. How radiators work, how heating systems work, how HVAC works, stuff that's been heavily published about. You could get an average of all those bits and pieces out there and cobble together a very compelling and very accurate storyline. On the fringe, not so much. And so think about individual people's names. If someone is not very popular, has not been written about much on the web, they're not going to do a very good job of that. I think I remember ChatGPT told me I've written 2 books. I was like, are you sure? Is that like in the future? Are you seeing what's happening? Like, is that how powerful you are? Like, in the future, I'll write this book. But the point is, they are very powerful in certain ways. And John, I'll throw this over to you. I think we're going to start seeing workflows where they are part of the workflow, but then in your RAG model or somewhere in the context, you have your traditional columnar
Mhm.
databases giving you deterministic data, for example. You're going to have UIs and other things that are around it. So it becomes a component part of the big picture, creating what you could folks call adaptive apps. Tell us about those and how this
Yeah,
all comes together.
yeah. Thank you. And it is in that combination of, because we're traditionally operational applications, which were very deterministic on what they were doing, and with the generative AI capability, the semantic pieces, it adds very interesting capabilities to the applications. It allows you to create, I think, what's being called hybrid search now, where you're combining the two together to give that kind of experience. There's a couple different pieces in here. It's you know you can imagine trying to solve a problem, or in an application where it's based on where this person is. So it's a geographic search, and they're querying for a set of shoes that would fit them, so they know what the size is. So they're giving very deterministic size,
Right,
and maybe they also
right.
know something else about them. They're for sports. They're running shoes. They know some things that are deterministic. About it, but they want it to be a certain color. They want it to match a pair of pants that they have, right? So it's a match this color. Well, that becomes more semantic. And so then that's where the semantic piece turns over and goes, it's not just blue, but I want to match this shade of blue exactly. And that's where you get these more combination or hybrid search pieces to create these adaptive applications. They can adapt based on, okay, the geography, within 20 miles of where I am right now, where can I find these shoes? And so it gives that level of flexibility with the hyper personalization, and combines that deterministic search SQL query capability, which we're all familiar with the vector search capability that is being added to databases, everywhere.
Yeah, I think so too. And Frank, I'll bring you in to that conversation as well. I think increasingly you're going to see these various bits and pieces form workflows, and these large language models and other foundational models are going to be a crucial part, probably on the front end, but also to a certain degree in the back end. It just depends on the use case, but you're going to be pulling them into workflows that are could become very powerful and very adaptive, as John suggests. What do you think about that, Frank?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to be honest, I use ChatGPT quite often, right? And I ask also questions that are very specific to what I do. And I'm surprised about the knowledge, right, of the AI, what answers it gets, suggestions, solutions, of course, programming, but more specifically, to what I do. And I think it's still going to be a couple of years, but if you combine AI with automation, right, and you build an internal RAG in the enterprise about the entire infrastructure of the company, you can have basically a virtual DBA or a virtual system admin that can monitor everything, right? And as soon as there's something wrong that happens, it knows, right? It can identify the alert, what it is. It can query another database to make sure the application is running or there's something. And then maybe it can, send a command to spin up a new server, right? And basically bring the application back online. So I think, it's going to be multiple application in analytics, definitely, because ChatGPT already does that. Right? You can give it a diagram or a table, and it will analyze the data for you and summarize it for you. So that's already a given. But I think merging AI with automation in the enterprise and interacting with other systems, right? That has to be online all the time, that have to provide real-time data all the time. I think that's going to happen very soon.
Yeah, it's happening very, very quickly, and maybe John, I'll throw this over to you. It's got to be exciting and a bit nerve-wracking to be a CIO or a CTO these days. How do you counsel your clients and keep them focused on what really matters? Because there are so many distractions now. It's so easy to get all these ideas, but at the end of the day, the trains have to run on time and business
Yep.
has to get done. So how do you counsel your clients to stay focused and keep improving, but not go too far out on a limb somewhere?
Yeah. I think it's a great question. I think it's always important to remind everybody and just ourselves that we're very early in this overall transition, specifically vis-a-vis AI and kind of the technology. The landscape is so dynamic in terms of the vendors and what's happening that during the time of this podcast, something will have changed probably in terms of how quickly the market's moving. So, our advice is things are definitely moving fast. Think in terms of areas where you can get incremental improvement, right? As a first, where can I add? If you look at some of the first implementations, it's been chatbots, um, you know, uh, code assistants, things like that, where people are getting the initial value. But the longer piece is what you were saying, which is in the workflows and how do I improve and integrate into workflows, which make workers more efficient in the things they do. If I'm a service agent who's servicing clients, or in a storefront, we have big customers like Louis Vuitton who have in-store applications that they've built on with on top of Couchbase. How would they go about including AI into that? It's a consultative process, and talking to them about trial and setting up kind of trial servers and applications, and envisioning how they would see that impacting the users, the end users that they want to do, and what information is needed, right? It's a ton of information architecture, and I'm sure, Frank can talk about it, ad nauseum in terms of the thinking about the data architecture that has to go behind enabling some of these things. So very early on in the transition, it's a multi-year transition for sure. And so, yes, keep the applications running that are mission critical, but look for ways to incrementally add value.
Hmm. And Frank, I'll throw this one over to you. As you suggested, migrating off a database is very, very painful. You want to get it right the first time, get the right database, and then stick to it because it's going to be painful. How do you work with clients to identify out of, and I just looked it up, 420 different databases that are considered mature and functional, enterprise capable, according to DB Engines. It's db-engines.com. That's a lot of choice out there. I mean, it's almost an embarrassment of riches. How do you work with clients to figure out, first of all, the short list, and then making that final decision? What are some thoughts or some insights you can offer the audience?
Well, I would say a database engine is almost like a car engine or a transportation engine, right? There's some that are very fast. I would compare that maybe to memory engine, right? And there's some that are not fast, but they carry a lot, right? They can handle maybe like a data warehouse, lots of data, right? Because they store the data different ways. Um, so you need to look at first what your application needs to do, right? Do you need high concurrency, very fast response? What kind of data are you storing, right? Is it key value pair, or are you storing transaction? Do you need redundancy, right? If your memory server goes down, you lose the data, right? Do you want to store that into a regular database where it goes to disk? So there's all these questions that you need to think about. I know there's a lot of database, but there's also a very few that do things very well, right? Because they've been doing it for a long time. We were talking about Oracle, IBM, right? They've been in the business for a long time. Snowflake, well, they caught up, right? Now it's the data warehouse in the cloud. It's very hard to compete with them. And that's the only thing they focus on, right? That's their thing. A lot of companies, they focus on many. I would say like AWS, for example, they focus on many services. So it's hard. Their products are good, but they are not great. Snowflake, that's what they focus on. Couchbase, same thing, that's what they focus on. So they spend all their research and development in that, right, to develop their product. So choosing the right database engine is you need to sit down, right? And sometimes, maybe you need two, maybe you need three database engines, right? And it's okay. It's okay. You don't need to run everything on the same database. Because first of all, it creates issues. If your database goes down, everything goes down. So it's good to also spread the risk and use the right database engine for the right purpose or what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and let's see. I guess I'll throw this one over to John again on this topic of choosing the right database, because you do not want to have to switch out databases. It's just absolutely brutal, especially if it's for a transactional system. I mean, analytical, it's not that big of a deal, but transactional is a very, very, very big deal.
Yeah.
What are some of the key considerations? Obviously, functionality and
Hmm.
fit for purpose, but also cost,
Yep.
license cost, roadmap of the vendor, like where they're going, how much they work with customers. I mean, Frank mentioned AWS. I heard a really interesting comment from an analyst a few years ago about AWS because I've gone into that environment and looked around, and it's almost like walking into a Home Depot. I mean, there's
Yeah.
just like stuff everywhere. Like, oh my God, what is all this stuff? What do I do? And he said the reason for that is because AWS, in their ethic, in their ethos, they work very, very closely with customers to create bespoke solutions. So when you do that, you're going to wind up with lots and lots of different services that can be cobbled together in various ways. So there are all these different factors, and of course, you're on-site team. Like, who do you
Hmm.
have on your team to manage this stuff? Yeah, DBAs aren't quite what they used to be, but you still need people who know how to run these things, how to stand
Hmm.
them up, how to restart them, all that stuff. So how do you counsel clients on figuring out what works best? What are the horses for which courses, basically?
Yeah, yeah. I would think we take an approach which is very client centric of looking at the requirements that they have for their application. I mean, we offer a multi-purpose database which has in-memory capability and multiple functionalities there. So it's a matter of just working with them and understanding what the requirements are that they have, scalability requirements, multi-cloud requirements. For us, Edge is we offer our database and platform extends to the edge, working offline and online. So it's really just digging into what kind of problem are you trying to solve, and then working with them to tweak the dials on Couchbase anyway to make sure that if it's if it's scale out architecture or heavy query workload or heavy write workload, like whatever it might be, so that we're leaning into and making sure that they're getting the most out of the database. But like you said, skills are big. I think from our standpoint, um, Couchbase Capella is a hosted database, so we're running it for them. So we sort of take some of that away in terms of the skills and allow them to focus on the unique value that they want and the applications they build. So there's all those, the APIs, the other systems it needs to tie into these data architectures. Again, I'm sure as Frank knows, is and yourself, very, very can be very, very complex. And so we do believe that a platform with a lot, with multi-purpose capabilities can simplify the architecture. I'll give you an example, which is for us, we believe vector search capability is a feature of a multi-purpose database, not a category itself,
Hmm.
right? Because you do get into moving data around between systems where operational databases are the source of truth in many cases.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. In fact, I do think that there is a lot of value in these vector searches in being able to do that discovery oriented work to understand how things align. And frankly, I read an article the other day on LinkedIn where some guy was talking about how he connected his LLM to his data sources and then was using it as the front end and saying, "Hey, run me a query on how many widgets we sold in this environment in this period of time," and it reached into the database, executed the
Mhm.
query, brought back the information and delivered. It's like, whoa,
Yeah.
wait a second. Now, I don't know what the footprint of that is. We don't know. There are many, many other shoes to drop in this game, but we'll pick that up after the break, folks. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking all things data, real-time data. We've got John Kreisa from Couchbase and Frank Levenor from Data Sleek. And I do want to talk about the power of in-memory, right? I mean, spinning disk is still out there. There are lots of spinning disks, but boy, this solid state stuff is getting much, much better these days. And of course, in-memory architectures are designed to be very, very fast. Now, you can only fit so much in memory, so you'd have to watch out for that. You don't want to overload the system and run into some problems. But John, I'll throw it over to you to talk about A, the importance of in-memory, and then B, give us some use cases for where that stuff really serves a good purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, in-memory architectures, support really, really high-speed query and analysis functionality, but principally really, really that they can speed up a traditional app by having a cache, or if it's your architecture, as it is in the case with Couchbase, we are a memory-first architecture, and why that matters is for specific use cases, as you said. So if we look at some of our, customers, some of the use cases, like commonly. we do user store. As a user store, that's a very common use case for gaming and for other kinds of applications which need to serve very, very quickly. So LinkedIn wrote a blog not that long ago about how they're using Couchbase to accelerate all of the logins into LinkedIn. And you can imagine how many times LinkedIn gets logged in, on a daily, per minute basis. And so they've incorporated Couchbase into their architecture to give them that speed. And that's really the importance. We're used commonly in gaming to do user stores and session stores for gaming. And it's the same thing. And, the beauty of the Couchbase architecture is we can both serve as that store and the system of record, as an operational database. So they kind of get the twofer in that way, but that it's that in-memory architecture which enables those kinds of applications and many, many more. But that's a good start on examples.
Yeah, those are excellent examples. And maybe Frank, I'll throw it over to you. Yeah, the environment is getting so gosh darn complex. But I'll tell you another, just to once again weave in some of this AI stuff. I was talking to a guy from a very, very big company, manufacturing company here in the US, and they have all sorts of obviously very, very intensive use cases. And they used a large language model. They asked it a question about something important, and it came back with an answer, but it only had a 59% score of confidence. And they're like, well, obviously we can't use that. And a member of his team said, well, let's ask it why it's only a 59% confidence score. And so they did. And it said, oh, because these data values didn't come through correctly and this was wrong and this didn't show up, et cetera, et cetera. And they're like, oh, well, now we know what to do. Right. It's kind of amazing what this AI can figure out, even in very complex environments. So it's another part of the toolkit to do troubleshooting and to do design work. What do you think about that, Frank?
Yeah, definitely. It's the knowledge it has is it's amazing. And like we said at the beginning of the show, it's just the beginning, right? When
Right.
you and keep increasing. I saw a few video of ChatGPT 4, and now they are incorporating visual sound. Right? They have two AI talking to each other. You can use your camera on the phone. It can look at you and see that your hair are not, like if you tell me I have an interview coming up, right? It looks at you and say, well, you should redo your hair a little bit. The guy puts a hat on. I say, well, I would not recommend wearing a hat for your interview. And the AI voice is laughing, right? So now what they are starting to add to AI is emotions, right?
Mm.
Like being sarcastic, right? So it's interesting because I guess they're making the AI more human, right? And it's going to be more, I guess, friendly, and people are going to feel connected to it. So that's the danger, right? Because we're already isolated. We have iPhones. So now if we
Right.
have a body AI where we can ask any question we want anytime, right? We're going to be connected to that AI all the time. So in terms of the business world, I think that's where it's going to go, right? Typing is great, but talking is faster, and you can ask questions, and then the AI is going to respond to you. And this has been in movies, for a long time. Minority Report, right? Where they move things around in the screen, and then if you look at Marvel, Iron Man, where Tony Stark talked to Jarvis, helping him build something, right? So I think this is where we're going to go. We're going to ask question to AI, something you're not sure. Hey, can you analyze this? Can you analyze that? What if I try this? What if I try that? What do you think about this idea, right? And this is going to be in multiple disciplines, right? Marketing, sales, support, and technology. So I think it's probably going exponential because this is also going to accelerate technology, right? We were already going very fast, but now AI is just going to be, some superpower that allows us to even create faster, better, right? Better coding. I mean, the code that ChatGPT creates is just amazing. I mean, you can just copy and paste, right? And you can also understand your code, right? You can give it to it, and you can read it, right? So it's fascinating, but also dangerous, right? We have to be careful, where it can go. I mean, if you look at the internet, social media, what happened, right? There were a lot of issues. With AI, it's going to be, could be the same. Military, right? Don't get access, don't give access to, military base to AI, for example. Right? What if something happened? What if something talks to AI and he thinks it's a simulation, right?
Right. Right.
So I think there's a lot of um, um, controls, right, that needs to be put in place. Um, maybe in business, right? Some people have more money, so they can build stuff that can compete against smaller business and affect them, right? So I don't know. It's a huge scope, right, that we have to look at.
Yeah, I almost think, John, I'll throw this over to you. Basically, every organization, I've thought for a long time and evangelized this concept, you need to have I call it like an information strategy group. Now, you do have things like centers of excellence, for example. And I was talking to a gentleman from Atlan yesterday, and they have something very cool called it's like the Office of the President, I think is what they call it, where there are a bunch of people who work for the president of the company, which is very interesting. I mean, obviously, you have direct reports like your head of marketing and your head of sales and finance and so forth, but to have this office of the president, I find very compelling uh, concept in an organizational hierarchy. And I think that now more than ever, companies need some person or group of people who are really looking at these technologies and understanding them and working with them and figuring out how they're going to patch into existing information architectures, whether that be for real-time data or stochastic purposes or whatever. But you need someone, and it's like that used to be the enterprise architect, right? Was the person who kind of understood how all the pieces come together. That where this person would fit in this group? What do you think about that idea?
It's a good question. I mean, I'll say even just from Couchbase standpoint, our CIO is the person who's leading the charge on cross use of AI within Couchbase. And I think at our customers, it does need to be somebody who's probably sits above a lot of different functions because of the holistic nature of the fact that it's going to touch customer experiences, and it's going to touch your engineering team, it's going to touch your marketing, to your point, and it really is going to holistically impact the entire organization. So perhaps an office of the CEO is right, or maybe CIO at some orgs. Again, it depends a little bit on how they're set up a bit, I would say, but it does need to be a very, very senior. Like we all saw the emergence of chief data officers. Will
Right.
there be an emergence of chief AI officer? I'm speculating, but maybe it might be.
Well, because it impacts everything. And when I look at these foundational models, not just the large language models, there are these what they call small language models now
Hmm.
and other foundational models. I have to think that, again, there are still other shoes left to drop. You think about the cost structures. It doesn't cost
Hmm.
very much to use this stuff. Well, that's because they're bringing you in, right? I mean, that other shoe is going to drop someday where your enterprise access to ChatGPT is going to go from whatever it is now, 10, 20, $30 a month to more like 2, 300 or
Yeah.
something. I think you're going to start to see some stratification of the different layers and what you get for all that. But clearly, they have captured the imagination of the business side. They have everyone in IT kind of going, "Oh man, what's going on here?" And for low-hanging fruit, it's very powerful. I mean, it's not a real-time database engine, but it's like, what can't these things do? At a certain point, you got to start asking yourself these questions. It's like, geez, yeah, we have to watch out for the deterministic stuff, that's for sure. But I've found they're actually very good at ETL, for example. They're good
Hmm.
at doing complex ETL jobs. So it's like when you have this Swiss Army knife that is so powerful and right now is pretty cheap, it's like, man, you better be working with this stuff on a regular basis. Hey,
Yeah.
folks, our third break is coming up here in just a second. If you want to be in the show, send me an email, info@dmradio.biz. That comes right to me. We'll be back with the podcast bonus segment. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, time for the podcast bonus segment with Frank Leveneur from Data Sleek and John Kreisa from Couchbase. And I'm going to throw both of you, Frank, you first, and then John, just comment on this. Here's my big idea. I wrote about this on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, actually, when I was heading to the Boomi conference. I'm just thinking about all this stuff and thinking about what Frank just mentioned in the break here, which is privacy, PII, IP, intellectual property, and using these engines is like, want to be careful about that. Here's my theory of what's going to happen, at least for any number of very forward-looking organizations who have the wherewithal to do this. I think that companies are going to instantiate their own small language model on-prem in their environment behind their firewall, so they own it, they run it, it's in their space. And then they're going to train it on their ERP data, their CRM data, their Salesforce data, their customer service data, all sorts of things. They're, if they have Splunk, whatever they have, they're going to train it on their information assets. And then the executives are going to have this snazzy UI, which is basically a natural language interface. And they're going to sit there and ask questions all day long. How is our marketing doing in the West Coast? Are we on plan right now? What can we do? Who do we need to hire? Where are there gaps in the organization? And they're just going to get all kinds of information coming trained on their corporate data. Now, I've heard a couple people say, yeah, I don't think there's going to be enough data to do that. I'm not so sure about that. I think that is the future, but what do you think about that, Frank?
No, I think there's enough there. I mean, if you think about businesses, right, they use so many SaaS services, right? That data needs to be centralized somewhere,
Right.
in order to do analytics and reporting. So the same thing is going to happen. They're just going to extend it and plug AI in it that can understand numbers, tracking HR. That's a software, right? You have the name of the people, what they do, when they were hired, how long they've been working, what they specialize. You have their resume. You put that into a centralized database, and then you plug AI. So yeah, I think and this is it's a natural behavior, I think, right? If you look at the internet at the beginning, it was B2C, and then people started building intranet, right? Internal network, totally
Right.
isolated from the public. You have your own network inside the company. And then you had B2B. After that, you work with partners and people, you give access and you can access your data. I think AI is going to be the same thing. Right now, we are in a B2C mode. They're exposing that to as many people as possible, getting feedback. But business are not going to go that route. They're going to build their own customized AI using open source. I know there's one from France actually called Mistral, which is
Yes. Mixture of experts.
competing.
Right.
Yeah, they are doing pretty well. So all those open source model are going to be brought into enterprise. They're going to build those models, and like you said, plug into all the database engines, query, build knowledge, and then after that you talk to them, and that's it, right? And I want to to talk also about something. I know we don't pay too much attention. I know a lot of analysts are kind of talking about Apple Vision Pro being too expensive. It has no future. But I've always believed in Apple because they are smart people. They do a lot of research, right? I think this is just the beginning. And the model is called Vision Pro. So it's for professional, right? That's why it's expensive. It's already used in medicine, doctors using it, but this is going to become the interface, right? Because AI, it's better to interact with voice, right? Why do you? Because it can understand your language.
Right.
You can even translate in different language. So
Right.
having Vision Pro, right, on your face, you can talk to it. Hey, I want to see this. Can you pull this report? Hey, what do you think about that? And then, those things are going to come up on your screen and say, hey, can you enlarge this? I want to see this. Oh, I don't understand that. What does that mean? Right. So it's going to be a full interaction. And you can FaceTime or interact with other people. You can say, hey, can you send this report to this person?
That's
so that
crazy.
goes back to where
Right.
we were, right? We're going to be more productive, accelerate, basically the technology, and people who are using the latest and are ready are the ones who are going to really perform well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And John, I'll throw it over to you. Not only will you ask it, say, give me a report on on the efficacy of our marketing campaigns in the Northeast, and then you get this information, say, okay, and then you tell it, please set up a meeting with all my senior VPs sometime next week to discuss this and give them a few charts to look at, enter, and then the system goes and finds, okay, everyone's available on this date. It sets up the meeting, sends you the invite, gets you the reports. I mean, compare that to how business has been done traditionally, and it's just crazy. You want to talk about real-time data, it's just wow. It's going to change how we work, but make us a lot more productive, I think. Real quick, what do you think?
Yeah, just as you said, I mean, knowledge workers are in the bullseye. an acceleration and improvement in efficiency, probably some elimination too, depending on the role. But I think it's squarely in the bullseye of these AIs. I agree there'll be private models. It's where the data is being created, does want to share, and enterprises will be more efficient. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, it's good stuff. We'll look these gentlemen up online. Folks, John Kreisa, that's Kreisa from Couchbase, and Frank Leveneur, Leveneur, of Data Sleek. Send me an email if you want to be in this show, info@dmradio.biz. We'll talk to you next time, folks. You've been listening to DM Radio.